Spirals. They're so weird, aren't they? It's like a big circle that just keeps going on and on endlessly. It's so mesmerizing. You can stare at it for hours, yet you will never get to the bottom of it. And Uzumaki takes that shape and turns it on its head, introducing the horror of the spiral. Before we get into it, let's talk about the great mind behind Uzumaki and many other great horror manga, Junji Ito. He has such an interesting way of combining both visual and narrative horror together. And if you're new to horror manga, I strongly recommend one of his recent manga collections called Shiver. It has 9 of his best short stories combined and would serve as a great starter to get you into the morbid yet beautiful world of Junji Ito. This man is a horror genius, and the main reason as to why I personally think so is how, in comparison to most horror mediums that give you the full story, which leads to it being no longer scary, Junji Ito gives the reader enough details to have an accurate image of the world, but not enough to know every single bit of it. I'm sure you've all heard about how the unknown is the thing that scares us the most as humans, and that our brain comes up with the worst possible explanations just to spite us. So I just find it really smart how Ito's writing method allows for the reader's head to fill in the blanks with the worst possible thing that they can think of, allowing for the stories to adjust to each person slightly and become 10 times scarier than it would have been if Ito had written something in stone. Now moving on to my favorite horror manga of his, Uzumaki. The entirety of the manga takes place in this little town named Kuruzucho. Everything seems fine, but one day our main character Kairi notices something very odd. She sees her boyfriend's father standing outside. She's weirded out by him as he sat there staring deeply into a shell that has a spiral pattern. Shuichi, Kairi's boyfriend, later tells her about how his dad had been obsessed with spirals, so much so that his entire office is now full of objects with the spiral pattern. Shuichi's father becomes so enthralled by the spiral that it consumes him completely, and he ends up realizing that he could leave all of the objects he's been gathering behind as he transforms his body's form into a spiral in of itself. But it's not just Shuichi's father. The entire town has been swallowed by the spiral. Everything from the stars above the sky to the sea close by. The nature of this town is getting turned around, quite literally. And with the eerie tone and captivating mood set, the townspeople also start to change. Some of them actually start to morph into spirals in an extremely nauseating way. I was so repulsed by it, yet I also couldn't stop reading either. Now, the more the story progresses in each chapter, the more we get to experience different spiral sightings in different instances around the town, but without putting the main narrative on hold. So, for example, Kairi and her friends run into so many encounters with twisted bodies and giant snails, as well as a creepy lighthouse and the craziest hair day ever. All of these stories combined serve the ultimate purpose of world building, which Junji Ito is fantastic at doing, but also build up the tension more. And something that also helps is the art. Junji Ito's art style is filled with sickly details contained inside of bold lines, and it all just looks really neatly put together. The world itself is extremely well drawn and even has a lot of small details in the form of spirals that you would only notice if you looked for it carefully. The body horror and havoc of the town feels so unnerving, making the mystery of the spirals so much more unsettling and creepy. I don't think I've ever experienced something like Uzumaki before. After finishing the manga, I spent the entirety of the next week just looking closely to notice any spirals, and I did. A lot of them, I'm afraid. So if I disappear in the next couple of weeks, you guys know why. I really liked the main cast of characters. They're all trying to understand and uncover the eerie mystery of the spirals. Kairi and Shuichi have good chemistry, but something that Kairi herself lacks is a bit of believability. Throughout most of the story, Shuichi is trying to convince her that Kuruzocho is cursed and that they should leave ASAP. But being the main character and having to drive the plot forward, she of course can't leave. And we know that as readers, but her reasoning behind not leaving is mostly just a blank excuse. Most of the time, she doesn't even believe what Shuichi says, even though he's right like 99.9% of the time. Man just doesn't miss. Aside from that, most characters don't have a reoccurring appearance, which could be annoying for some people who would see it as a waste of time to get introduced to someone that they will never see again. But I feel like that's not the point. Most characters only appear to give the main cast an encounter with the spirals in many different and creepy ways. and that's just their purpose. Junji Ito's stories are short most of the time, and why that's actually beneficial to horror is because he introduces some characters and the world to the reader, then leaves it off as soon as it hits the highest level of scary that it can reach. And that's the smart thing that Ito manages to pull off, is going out on top. As soon as you start to feel scared and terrified, the story just ends. And at first you might find that odd, but the more you think about it, you start to realize that when the story goes out on top, it has a much higher probability of scaring every reader than it would if Ito were to continue it to the very end. And that's what I was talking about earlier in the video. When Ito leaves the rest of the story up to your interpretation of the reasons behind these bizarre phenomena, your brain starts to fill in the blanks with the scariest things it can think of, just to spook you. I love Junji Ito's style because it feels like I'm writing the story with him in some aspects. He gives you the mood, the setting, characters, and the majority of the narrative, but without answering every question. The rest is up to you to imagine and scare yourself, essentially. It's literally genius because horror is like comedy, right? They're both subjective, and just like how not everyone has the same taste in comedy, everyone isn't going to get scared from the same things. But when you leave a part of it for your reader's head to fill in, it's guaranteed that a much larger number of readers are going to find your story way more terrifying than if you were to answer all questions and give reasoning behind everything that's happening. Lastly, on a totally unrelated note, Mr. Beast, I'm sure you all know him, is working with trusted organizations to help clean up the ocean. TEAMSEAS is a great cause that will help a lot of countries out. And if you donate just $1, it would help a lot by cleaning up 1 pound of trash from the ocean. And even if you can't donate, help raise awareness to the project by telling your friends and family. All the links will be in the description below. Any amount of money helps. Let's help clean up the ocean, guys. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Bye!